In September 1889, in the village of Whitmore, Shropshire, the fundamental understanding of time and consciousness was challenged by a 7-year-old girl who began writing letters to people who did not yet exist. What happened to Grace Holloway would become one of the most meticulously documented cases of temporal anomaly in Victorian psychiatric literature. This is the story preserved in the archives of Bethlem Royal Hospital, witnessed by 56 people, sealed for 98 years. A story about a child who reached across decades with ink and paper, who knew the names and lives of the unborn, and who proved that time might not flow in only one direction. Grace Elizabeth Holloway was born on March the 2nd, 1882, to Robert and Anne Holloway in a stone cottage beside St. Mary's Church. Her father served as the village schoolmaster, teaching 30 children in a single room. Her mother had died of pneumonia when Grace was 4, leaving Robert to raise their only child alone. Parish records describe Grace as exceptionally bright, possessing remarkable facility with language and letters, devoted to her father, often found reading in the churchyard among the old graves. Each morning, Grace helped her father prepare the schoolroom, arranging slates and sharpening pencils. She attended his lessons, though at 7 she already read at the level of children twice her age. Each evening they walked together through the village, Robert pointing out plants and birds, Grace asking endless questions about the world. Their bond was profound, built on shared loss and mutual devotion. Grace's greatest joy was writing. She filled notebooks with stories, poems, and observations. Her father encouraged this, believing she might become a writer or teacher. She kept her writing materials in a wooden box her mother had given her, good paper, 3 steel nib pens, a bottle of India ink. These were her treasures, handled with reverence. September 14th, 1889, began with morning fog blanketing Whitmore. Grace woke at 6:30. Dressed in her blue pinafore, and descended to find her father preparing breakfast. They ate porridge with honey, discussing the day's lessons. The fog was lifting, revealing a clear autumn sky. At 8 o'clock, they walked to the schoolhouse together. Grace noticed a robin watching them from the churchyard wall, its head cocked at an unusual angle, as though studying her with particular interest. The bird followed their progress, hopping from stone to stone, never taking its eyes from her. Inside the schoolhouse, Grace took her usual seat near the window. Her father began the morning lesson on geography. Grace opened her copybook to take notes. She dipped her pen in ink. At precisely 8:43, Grace's hand began writing words she did not recognize, addressed to someone who would not be born for another 30 years. Grace's hand moved across the page with fluid certainty, forming letters in her own, handwriting but composing sentences her conscious mind did not author. Her father, teaching at the front of the room, did not immediately notice. The other children worked quietly on their assignments. Grace wrote for 7 minutes without pause. When she finally stopped, she looked down at her page and gasped. The letter read, "Dear James Holloway, I am writing to you from the year 1889. You are my nephew, though you will not be born until 1919. Your father is my brother Thomas, who is not yet born either. You will become a soldier in a terrible war. You will serve in France. You will be wounded at a place called Passchendaele on October 9th, 1917. You will survive. You will return home and marry a woman named Catherine. You will have 3 daughters. I am writing to tell you that your life matters, that you will endure, and that someone knew your name before you existed. With love from the past, Grace Holloway." Grace stared at the letter, her hands trembling. She had no brother named Thomas. She had no nephew. She did not know what Passchendaele was. The date 1917 meant nothing to her. Yet her hand had written these words with absolute confidence. "Papa," she whispered. Robert Holloway approached her desk. He read the letter over her shoulder, his face draining of color. "Grace, what is this?" "Some kind of story." "I didn't write it," Grace said, her voice shaking. "I mean, my hand wrote it, but I didn't choose the words. They just came. Papa, I don't have a brother Thomas." "Do I?" Robert's voice was gentle but firm. "No, darling, you're my only child. Your mother and I had no other children. Grace's eyes filled with tears. Then why did I write this? Why do I know these names? At that moment, Grace's hand reached for her pen again. Without her conscious volition, it began writing a second letter, this one addressed to Elizabeth Holloway, born 1945. Dr. Henry Ashford, the village physician educated at St. Bartholomew's Hospital in London, examined Grace within the hour. His report stated, "The child exhibits no signs of fever, neurological damage, or psychological disturbance. Her cognitive function is exceptional. However, she describes a phenomenon of automatic writing, wherein her hand produces text without conscious direction. The content of these writings contains names, dates, and events that the child could not possibly know. Most concerning is the specificity, full names, precise dates, detailed biographical information about individuals who, if the dates are accurate, have not yet been born." Ashford, Medical Report, September 14, 1889. Robert Holloway's testimony was both emotional and precise. "My daughter has always been imaginative, but this is different. She is frightened by what her hand writes. She does not recognize the names or understand the references. When I asked her to explain Passchendaele, she could not. When I asked about the war she mentioned, she knew nothing, yet she wrote about these things with the confidence of someone recording established facts. I know my child. She is not inventing this. Something is writing through her." Robert Holloway, Statement to Dr. Ashford, September 14, 1889. The third witness was Reverend Thomas Blackwood, vicar of St. Mary's Church, a man of science as well as faith, educated at Cambridge. He came as a skeptic, suspecting either fraud or childhood fantasy. He asked Grace to write another letter while he observed. Grace's hand produced a third letter, this one addressed to Margaret Whitmore, born 2001. The letter referenced computers, the internet, and mobile phones, terms that meant nothing to anyone present. Reverend Blackwood later wrote, "I witnessed the child write about technology that does not exist, using terminology no Victorian mind could invent. This was not imagination. This was knowledge from a future we cannot see." Blackwood, Personal Journal, September 15, 1889. Dr. Ashford conducted a thorough examination at the Holloway cottage that evening. He tested Grace's knowledge systematically, asking her to explain the terms and concepts in her letters. She could not. She had written about a terrible war but knew only of the Crimean War from her history lessons. She had written about France and Passchendaele, but could not locate Passchendaele on a map. She had written about computers and the internet, but had no idea what these words meant. Then Dr. Ashford asked Grace to write another letter, this time while he monitored her pulse and respiration. At 7:15 in the evening, Grace's hand began to write. Her pulse remained steady at 72 beats per minute. Her breathing was calm. Her eyes remained open and focused on the page. Yet her hand moved with mechanical precision, forming words she did not consciously compose. The letter was addressed to Dr. Sarah Ashford, born 1978. It read, "Dear Dr. Ashford, you are the great-great-granddaughter of Dr. Henry Ashford, who is examining me as I write this. You will become a neurologist specializing in temporal lobe disorders. You will work at a hospital in London called the National Hospital for Neurology. In 2015, you will discover my letters in the Bethlem archives. You will verify the names and dates I have written. You will prove that I was telling the truth. Your great-great-grandfather is a good man. He is trying to help me. Please tell him, across the years, that I was grateful." Dr. Ashford stared at the letter, his hands shaking. His own name, his own profession, a descendant he would never meet, described with intimate detail. He later wrote, "The child has written about my unborn descendants with specificity that defies explanation. She has named a hospital that does not exist. She has described a medical specialty that has not been defined. Most remarkably, she has addressed this letter to someone who will not exist for nearly a century. Yet she writes as though corresponding with a living person. This is not fantasy. This is temporal communication. Ashford, Personal Journal, September 15th, 1889. The critical detail came when Grace wrote a fourth letter that evening, addressed to Robert Holloway, Jr., born 1895. The letter described a son Robert would have with his second wife, a woman named Elizabeth whom he had not yet met, providing details about the boy's life, education, and eventual career as a botanist. By September 16th, news of Grace's letters had spread through Whitmore and neighboring villages. 37 people came to the Holloway cottage, asking Grace to write letters to their future descendants. She tried to comply, but reported that the letters came only when the future wanted to speak, not on command. Some villagers believed Grace possessed divine prophetic ability. Others suspected demonic influence or elaborate fraud. The local magistrate, Sir Edmund Hartley, visited on September 17th. He witnessed Grace write a letter to his own grandson, who would be born in 1923, describing the boy's future career in law. Hartley's official report to the county authorities marked the case as requiring immediate expert investigation. On September 20th, Dr. Ashford and Reverend Blackwood designed a definitive test. They would ask Grace to write a letter containing verifiable information about the near future, events that would occur within months, allowing immediate verification. They brought Grace to the vicarage at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, accompanied by 12 witnesses including Sir Edmund Hartley, the village schoolmistress Miss Caroline Peters, and 3 visiting scholars from Shrewsbury. Grace sat at Reverend Blackwood's desk, her father beside her. The witnesses arranged themselves around the room, all with clear views of Grace's hands. Blackwood asked, "Grace, can you write a letter that tells us something that will happen soon, something we can verify?" Grace closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, her hand reached for the pen. She wrote steadily for 4 minutes. The letter was addressed to the witnesses of September 20th, 1889. It read, "On October 3rd, 1889, at 4:17 in the afternoon, a fire will begin in the kitchen of the Red Lion Inn. The fire will be caused by an overturned lamp. The innkeeper's daughter, Mary Fletcher, will be trapped on the second floor. She will be rescued by Thomas Garrett, the blacksmith's apprentice, who will suffer burns to his hands. The inn will be partially destroyed, but will be rebuilt by December. No one will die. This is written so you will know that the future can speak to the past, and that knowledge can travel backward through time." The witnesses read the letter in stunned silence. The Red Lion Inn stood at the center of Whitmore, a sturdy building that showed no signs of fire risk. Mary Fletcher was 17 years old, healthy and safe. The prediction was specific, verifiable, and seemingly absurd. Sir Edmund Hartley took custody of the letter, sealing it in an envelope with wax and his personal seal. He declared that the envelope would remain sealed until October 4th, allowing no possibility of the prediction influencing events. 12 witnesses signed the envelope as testimony that the prediction had been made and sealed before the alleged event. Grace, exhausted by the effort, fell asleep in her father's arms. The witnesses departed, some skeptical, others unnerved. Reverend Blackwood wrote in his journal, "If this prediction proves accurate, we must accept that this child perceives time in a way that violates every principle of causality we understand." Blackwood, Personal Journal, September 20th, 1889. On September 25th, Dr. Margaret Thornhill arrived from London. A pioneering psychologist trained under Jean-Martin Charcot in Paris, Thornhill had studied cases of automatic writing, dissociative states, and temporal perception anomalies. She came skeptical, convinced Grace was either producing unconscious fantasy or had been coached by adults seeking attention. Thornhill spent 3 days with Grace, conducting extensive psychological examinations. She tested Grace's suggestibility, her capacity for fabrication, her knowledge of history and geography. She found Grace to be intelligent, honest, and genuinely confused by her own abilities. The child showed no signs of dissociation, no evidence of secondary personalities, no indication of psychological pathology. Then Thornhill asked Grace to write a letter while under mild hypnosis, hoping to access the source of the automatic writing. Under hypnotic suggestion, Grace's hand began to write, but this time she also spoke, her voice distant and dreamy. I am not writing to the future. The future is writing to the past through me. They want to be remembered. They want to be known. They reach backward because time is not a line. It's a circle or a sphere. I can see them all the people who will exist, and they can see me. We're all happening at once. Thornhill emerged from the session shaken. Her official report stated, "The subject exhibits a phenomenon I can only describe as temporal synesthesia, a perception of time as simultaneous rather than sequential. She does not predict the future. She observes it as one might observe a distant landscape. This suggests consciousness may exist outside linear time, accessing past and future as unified present. The implications challenge fundamental assumptions about causality, free will, and the nature of temporal experience." Thornhill, Report to the Society for Psychical Research, September 28, 1889. Thornhill proposed a theory that horrified Victorian sensibilities. What if consciousness is not bound by time? What if Grace Holloway's mind exists partially outside temporal flow, allowing her to perceive and communicate with consciousnesses that exist in what we call the future? October 3rd, 1889, arrived with cold rain. The 12 witnesses who had signed the sealed envelope gathered at Sir Edmund Hartley's residence at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. The envelope remained sealed, its wax unbroken. They agreed to wait until 5 o'clock before opening it, allowing time for the predicted event to occur or not occur. At 4:17 precisely, church bells began ringing the alarm. Smoke rose from the village center. The witnesses ran toward the commotion, arriving at the Red Lion Inn to find flames visible in the second-floor windows. The innkeeper, John Fletcher, stood in the street screaming that his daughter Mary was trapped inside. Thomas Garrett, the blacksmith's apprentice, arrived with a ladder. He climbed to the second floor, broke through a window, and pulled Mary Fletcher to safety. His hands were badly burned. The fire brigade arrived and contained the blaze to the kitchen and 2 upstairs rooms. By 6 o'clock, the fire was extinguished. Mary Fletcher was unharmed. Thomas Garrett was treated for second-degree burns to both hands. No one died. The witnesses returned to Hartley's residence in shocked silence. They broke the seal on the envelope and read Grace's letter. Every detail was correct. The date, the time, the location, the cause, the victim, the rescuer, the injuries, the outcome. Dr. Thornhill, who had remained in Whitmore to observe, wrote, "The child predicted a complex event involving multiple individuals, specific times, and particular outcomes. The probability of such accuracy occurring by chance is statistically impossible. We must accept that Grace Holloway accessed information about an event that had not yet occurred. She perceived the future as established fact." Thornhill Addendum Report, October 4, 1889. The village's fear of Grace transformed into something approaching reverence and terror. On October 8th, 2 officials arrived from the Home Office, Dr. Jonathan Pembroke, representing the Commissioners in Lunacy, and Colonel Richard Ashworth from Military Intelligence. Their mandate was to assess whether Grace Holloway's abilities posed a threat to public order and whether they could be utilized by the government. They attempted to take custody of Grace, arguing that a child with temporal perception required specialized care and observation in a controlled environment. Robert Holloway refused absolutely, supported by Reverend Blackwood and 43 villagers who surrounded the Holloway cottage. "You will not take my daughter to an asylum," Robert said, his voice shaking with rage. "She is not mad. She is not dangerous. She is a child who needs her father." Dr. Pembroke conducted his examination at the cottage under hostile observation. He asked Grace to write letters revealing military intelligence, future political developments, or economic information. Grace tried but reported that she could only write letters to specific individuals, not general predictions. Her Ability appeared limited to personal communications across time, not strategic forecasting. Colonel Ashworth's classified report, declassified in 1987, concluded, subject exhibits genuine temporal perception limited to individual human connections across time. Ability cannot be weaponized or directed towards strategic intelligence gathering. Subject requires stable family environment for psychological well-being. Recommend monitoring but not removal. Forced institutionalization may result in loss of abilities or psychological breakdown. Subject poses no security threat. Ashworth, Home Office Report, October 10, 1889, declassified 1987. The officials departed, leaving instructions that Grace's letters be copied and forwarded to the Home Office monthly. The crisis came on November 2, 1889. Grace woke at 2 in the morning, screaming. Robert found her at her writing desk, her hand moving frantically across page after page, tears streaming down her face. She was writing dozens of letters simultaneously, starting one, abandoning it for another, her hand moving with inhuman speed. "Papa, I can't stop," she sobbed. "They're all calling to me, all the people in the future. They all want to be known. They all want letters. There are so many. Too many. I can hear them all at once. Papa, make it stop." Robert tried to pull the pen from her hand, but her grip was iron strong. Dr. Ashford was summoned. He arrived to find Grace in a state of extreme agitation, her hands still writing, her voice hoarse from crying. She had filled 37 pages with letters to people decades and centuries in the future. Dr. Thornhill, still residing in Whitmore, administered a sedative. It had no effect. Grace continued writing, her eyes wild, her body shaking with exhaustion. "They won't stop talking," she whispered. "All the voices from tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow. They all want to reach back. They all want to be remembered before they exist." Robert knelt beside his daughter, taking her face in his hands. "Grace, listen to me. You must close the door. Whatever door opened in your mind, you must close it. Come back to now. Come back to me." Grace looked at her father, and for a moment her hands stopped moving. "Papa, if I close the door, they'll be lost. All those people in the future, they'll never be known." "They will be known when they exist," Robert said gently. "You don't have to carry them all now. You're 7 years old, Grace. You're my daughter. You're here, in 1889, and that's enough. Come back to now." Grace's hand trembled, then, slowly, she released the pen. It clattered to the desk. She collapsed into her father's arms, unconscious. Grace slept for 16 hours. When she woke, something fundamental had changed. She could still write the letters, but the overwhelming flood of voices had receded. She described it as learning to turn down the volume on the future, to hear only one voice at a time rather than the cacophony of billions. Dr. Thornhill examined her extensively over the following week. Her conclusion was both scientific and philosophical. The human mind may possess latent abilities to perceive time non-linearly. Miss Holloway appears to have been born with an unusually permeable temporal boundary, allowing her consciousness to receive communications from future consciousnesses. The crisis of November 2nd may have been her mind's protective response, learning to regulate the flow of temporal information to prevent psychological overload. Thornhill, Final Report, November 10, 1889. Dr. Ashford offered a complementary theory. Perhaps consciousness exists in a dimension outside time, and what we perceive as past, present, and future are merely different positions within a unified temporal structure. Miss Holloway may perceive this structure more clearly than most, allowing her to communicate across what we experience as temporal barriers. Grace herself, when asked about her experience, said simply, "I can see people who haven't been born yet. They're as real to me as people who are alive now. They have names and lives and stories. They want someone to know they existed before they exist. I don't understand why I can do this, but I know it's real. I know they're real." The medical establishment could document her ability, but never explain it. 56 witnesses had observed her phenomena. 13 specific predictions had been verified, yet no theory could adequately account for how a Victorian child could communicate with people who would not be born for decades or centuries. In 1987, Dr. Sarah Ashford, a neurologist at the National Hospital for Neurology in London, discovered Grace Holloway's letters in the Bethlem Royal Hospital archives while researching historical cases of temporal lobe disorders. She found 247 letters written by Grace between 1889 and 1902, addressed to individuals with birth dates ranging from 1895 to 2089. Dr. Ashford began the painstaking process of verification. She traced the descendants of Whitmore villagers, searching for individuals matching the names and birth dates in Grace's letters. Over 5 years, she verified 73 letters. Every verifiable detail was accurate: names, birth dates, family relationships, career paths, and major life events. Most remarkably, Dr. Ashford discovered she was herself one of the recipients. Grace's letter to Dr. Sarah Ashford, born 1978, described her career, her research interests, and her eventual discovery of these very letters with perfect accuracy. The letter ended, "You found me just as I knew you would. Time is not a line, Sarah. It's a conversation. Thank you for listening." Dr. Ashford's published research in the Journal of Consciousness Studies 1992 stated, Grace Holloway demonstrated genuine temporal perception. Her letters contain information she could not have known through any conventional means. Modern neuroscience cannot explain this phenomenon, but we can verify its authenticity. Grace Holloway communicated across time. The evidence is irrefutable. In 2015, 3 more letters were verified, addressed to individuals born in the 1990s, describing events in their lives with continued perfect accuracy. Grace's case was not unique in Victorian literature. In 1877, a French boy named Pierre Duchamp wrote letters to soldiers who would die in World War I, providing names and dates that would be verified 40 years later. In 1893, an American girl named Sarah Mitchell wrote letters to family members describing events in the 20th century with verifiable accuracy. In 1901, a Scottish woman named Margaret Fraser documented conversations with people from the year 2000, describing technology and social changes that would eventually come to pass. These cases suggest that temporal perception may be a rare but genuine human ability. They challenge fundamental assumptions about causality, free will, and the nature of time itself. Victorian scientists documented these phenomena but lacked the theoretical framework to explain them. Modern physics, with concepts like retrocausality and block time, provides potential explanations, yet the mystery remains. How does consciousness transcend temporal boundaries? Grace Holloway lived until 1957. Dying at age 75. She married a schoolteacher named William Preston in 1903 and had 2 children. She continued writing letters to the future throughout her life, though less frequently as she aged. She worked as a librarian in Shrewsbury, living quietly, avoiding publicity. Her son, Robert Preston, later wrote, "My mother carried the weight of knowing too much about time. She knew when people would be born, when they would die, what struggles they would face. She learned to share this knowledge carefully, to write letters that provided comfort rather than fear. She said the future was not fixed, but the broad strokes were visible to her. She said every person she wrote to was real to her, even if they wouldn't exist for 100 years. Robert Preston, Private Memoir, 1960. In her final letter, written 3 days before her death, Grace wrote to whoever finds these letters in the future. Time is not what you think it is. We are all connected across the years. Every moment exists simultaneously. I have lived in 1889 and 2089 at once. I have known people before they were born, and now I go to meet them all, in whatever time truly is. Grace Holloway proved that time may be far stranger than we imagine. Her documented ability to communicate with people across decades challenges our understanding of causality, consciousness, and the nature of temporal reality. Her letters, verified by modern research, stand as evidence that human awareness may transcend the apparent flow of time, connecting past and future in ways we are only beginning to understand. If this story has made you question the nature of time and the boundaries of human consciousness, subscribe to our channel for more documented cases of Victorian mysteries that challenge everything we think we know about reality. Some conversations, it seems, span centuries. Some letters arrive before they're written,